We are very pleased to have with us Ambassador Amos Hochstein. He is a special advisor to President Biden. He is also, most consequentially of late, a negotiator who helped broker the ceasefire deal between, let's call it Lebanon, Hezbollah primarily, and Israel, a ceasefire that is quite shaky but seems to be holding for now. So we'll discuss today how that happened, where does this leave Lebanon going forward, and what the implications are. I think obviously we're all seeing those implications right across the border in Syria. So without too much preamble, let me just introduce myself. I'm Richard Engel. I'm the chief foreign correspondent for NBC News. I've been covering the Middle East for about 25, 26 years now. I've spent quite a bit of time in Lebanon and Syria. I used to live there. I was just there during the war. But we're here to talk to you. So let's just start out by understanding a little bit about how this deal came about. We obviously all watched the war in Gaza, the ongoing war, and then at some stage, Israel turned its attention to the north and opened this military campaign in response to the bombings that had been coming in the rocket fire. When did it come about that there was a real push to end the war? How did this breakthrough happen? Could you walk us through that?
Sure. So one, I'm going to change the premise of the question because I don't think that it was Israel eventually turned its attention to the north. So let's take a step back for a second because I think the origin of the conflict plays a critical role in the eventual resolution of it. October 7th happens within hours. While Hamas was still occupying towns inside Israel, before they were pushed back into Gaza, Hezbollah essentially opens a second front. Now, it may not have opened it wholeheartedly, but it opened the second front on October 8th in the early hours, so 2-3 a.m. On October 8th, a cell infiltrates Israel from the north. There's a gun battle. Israel responds, Hezbollah responds back, and there's a tit for tat ever since. And so that's the origin story of this battle. And I've often been asked what changed that was able, after 10 months, 12 months of negotiations to a ceasefire, you finally got one. And the reality is we didn't actually try to get a ceasefire in the first instance, because for many months, this was not a war between Israel and Lebanon. You accurately just said that in your opening. This was a war between Israel and Hezbollah, or Israel and Iran, any way you want to see it. Lebanon happened to be the playground that Hezbollah or Iran chose to as the host for this conflict. But the Lebanese people did not go to war against Israel, or vice versa. So that's the origin story. So the first many months really were focused around trying to get, since I did not believe that we can get resolution, a ceasefire, I didn't see that as a possibility because of the Hezbollah statement week after week, month after month. We will not stop, no matter what, unless there is a lasting ceasefire in Gaza. Or sometimes, as long as Israel's inside Gaza, we're not going to stop.
So that was Hezbollah's position from the beginning. Hezbollah said, we're not at war, this is a part of the Gaza war. But then, at some stage, and I think we all know what happened, when Israel did, militarily at least, respond in a major way and send troops into southern Lebanon, it clearly opened a new war and decimated Hezbollah, decimated its capacities. How did the breakthrough happen?
So I think so Hezbollah, even at its weak point, it lost its entire leadership, right? So it wasn't just the ground invasion, which was preceded by Nasrallah, Asaf al-Din. I mean, a whole big chunk of the absolute top leadership of Hezbollah was eliminated. We saw an opening to try to change the equation. There were a number of points that had to be done. One was there had to be a delinkage between Gaza and Lebanon, which was a difficult piece to do, but was what we were able to do for the ceasefire. Number two was to understand that the solution was not going back to October 6th, the reality of October 6th. which some in Lebanon saw as that is the goal. Let's just go back to where it was before. But the trauma, the psyche in Israel was that's not possible. So we had to design something that would allow for Israeli communities to go back to their homes in northern Israel, feeling that there was not a potential for an October 7-like attack on the other side. And there had to be something about in the state of Lebanon that would be able to ensure that it was going to hold, that Hezbollah would actually not be in the south and not restart the whole, let's start a new 20-year cycle of building and so on. UN Security Council Resolution 1701 ended the 2006 war. Nobody even tried to implement it at all. The international community brokered it, got the Security Council resolution passed, and walked away. It's not that it held for a while. It never held. The ceasefire held. But underneath that, no provision of it on either side of the conflict was ever implemented. So we had to get to a deal that would be based on 1701, but would put some elements to it that allowed it to actually be implemented, and that's what I think broke through. And eventually, I think both sides at the end of the day, different from Gaza, don't have a legacy issue here. There's no territorial claims that Israel has in Lebanon. There's no hostages that need to be freed from the other side. And there's no war between Israel and the state of Lebanon or the people of Lebanon. It's between Hezbollah and Israel.
This is a very well read in room. Everyone here knows all of these dates, I'm sure, and all the resolutions backwards and forwards. But for those who don't, so there was another war in 2006. I covered that war as well, and it was quite brutal and devastating. And the war ended with this UN resolution that said Hezbollah had to pull out of the south so that it would be a demilitarized area, and that would end the conflict for a much longer term. That never happened. Hezbollah still retained its military positions in the south and its social network, but it did stop fighting. So there was a general calming down of the situation until the October 7th attacks. The question is, it struck a lot of people in this part of the world as odd, this idea of decoupling. How can you separate what's happening in Gaza from what's happening in Lebanon? I know you had to do that in order to make a signable deal. But in the hearts and minds of many people who are watching this conflict, certainly the hearts and minds of many Lebanese people, you couldn't really separate them so much because it was such a tremendous event. It was such an important region-changing, ongoing situation. So how did you manage to do that when you're trying to separate something that for many people could not be distinguished?
Because my view was and is that the majority of the people never understood the connection. It's not that they never understood the delinkage. They didn't understand or accept the connection. I think the vast majority of Lebanese never accepted the linkage. And my simple point to Hezbollah was, for a long time, and to the Lebanese people, if Sinwar, before he died, said, I'm happy with this being a forever war, which he said, right? I mean, there was a point in time where he came out through messages that came into the New York Times from Mashal and others saying this will be a war of attrition. It will be an ongoing forever war. So does that mean that the Lebanese people are voluntarily saying that we're going to have a forever war between Israel and Lebanon? One, that's eventually not going to work for Israel, and that's what I told the Lebanese, because they're not going to accept that this is a forever status quo where part of their country is uninhabitable. And why should the Lebanese people accept it? And I got to tell you, I think the majority, and I believe this firmly, a majority of the Lebanese did not accept that status quo. Now, Hezbollah
did not accept that linkage.
That linkage. And I think that as Hezbollah was losing the war, the physical war, which is very different from what it was in 2006, which was kind of fought to a draw. Here, it was not being fought to a draw. Israel was making clear gains on the battlefield. And I think Lebanese people started getting sick and tired of this. And the one thing that I've learned, even in Lebanon, as in other places, is that it doesn't matter if you're a democracy or not. Public opinion does matter. It does carry. And I think the fact that the majority of the population wanted this delinkage or did not accept the linkage in the first place, helped get us to the delinkage once the antagonist was a bit weaker.
How would you assess Hezbollah's strength right now? You had a situation in Lebanon where Hezbollah, for many years, was stronger than the armed forces of the country. They were the most powerful group in the country. I saw them, when I was living there, push aside the government. They held street protests, they took over Beirut, and made the government bend to their will. Now their leaders have been eliminated, many of their weapons have been destroyed. That power dynamic has changed. Before we talk about what that means for Lebanon, how would you assess their strength? Are they as weakened as it seems from the outside?
It's hard to quantify weakness or strength. A significant portion of their weapons are gone. A significant amount of their fighters are either dead or incapacitated to fight. I think the morale is fairly low. But I think you have to look at things take a step back a bit. They suffered terrible losses in in South Lebanon by Israel. But they also now have Syria, where the reliance on the Iranians to come in with heavy weaponry and transfers of weapons is now curtailed. They have fought a war for 10 years to support the Assad regime. That seems now to be on the run. And the question whether or not they have even the capacity to go and support it there. And so I think that there is a fundamental weakness in the organization. It is missing its 30-something year leader that was a very charismatic leader that built this organization, this terrorist organization.
Hassan Nasrallah.
Hassan Nasrallah from the ground up. Leaders are important, and they don't have that right now. So I think I don't know that Lebanon has internalized the weakness of Hezbollah on the one hand. On the other hand, their weakness to be able to fight Israel or to support the Assad regime in its fight may be sort of diminished to gone. That doesn't mean that they don't have enough strength to maintain a position politically in Lebanon and to push people around.
But
that's a delicate balance.
So, since you brought it up, let's focus on Syria for a bit, and then we'll talk about what this means for the internal politics in Lebanon, which have always been delicate. But if Hezbollah right now can't project power effectively across the border into Syria, and what I was told by contacts in Syria is that as soon as the campaign began, the targeted campaign against Hezbollah leaders, they started going underground in Lebanon and in Syria. So once the people who are sort of propping up the regime go into hiding, it makes it very difficult for them to prop up the regime. So was this part of your conversation? Did you ever, in all of the conversations you had with the Israelis, with the Lebanese, with the national security officials in the United States, did it ever occur to you, or did you have this conversation saying, hey, if we weaken Hezbollah, which is propping up the regime next door, we could see a renewal of the civil war, or we could see regime collapse in Syria? Did that come up?
No, we did not see it as a weakening of the regime. I think that where Syria did come in is when you look at the ceasefire agreement, it is not about South Lebanon. It is about all of Lebanon. It calls for, yes, there's a lot of focus on moving Hezbollah completely out of the south, leaving their weaponry behind for the LAF to take, the Lebanese army. But it is also about the Syria-Lebanon border, as mentioned in the ceasefire as well, that has to be protected so that you don't have the flow of weaponry coming in from Syria. Now, that was going to be the linchpin of the success of this, of the length of this ceasefire holding and the state of Lebanon being able to rebuild. And that is if Hezbollah is able to immediately rearm, since it lost somewhere between 50 and 70% of its weapons, then that's going to shorten
50 to 70%? That's your estimate?
That's a pretty wide gap between 50 and 70. So I would say I'm safe there. I would probably argue if I had to get pushed that it was closer to the 70 than to 50, but also separate out between short range, medium range, long range, sophisticated, and so on. But
I understand most of their heavier weapons, longer-range weapons, were destroyed.
a lot of them were destroyed. A lot of them were. That's why the two centers of the war were really in the south and in the Bekaa Valley, where they have a whole underground city of weapons and factories. But if you can not shut down, but at least slow down that highway of drugs out and weapons in, then if you can slow that down, you have a shot at keeping Hezbollah from rearming. I think what's happened in Syria, which of course happened the day after the ceasefire is when it started, is now creating a new weakness for Hezbollah, because it's going to make it very difficult for Iran, who's pulling out of Syria to some degree, be able to transfer weapons in. So this is all happening very fast, right? So we went from most Lebanese believing in the mythology of Hezbollah's strength because of the '06 war and the speeches and and all the surprises, to a realization that they were routed really badly, very quickly, with accurate intelligence and so on, to then a collapse of the Syrian army across Syria, which is also something that most people in Lebanon probably did not expect to ever see, and believing in the strength of the Assad regime together with Iran and Russia. And all of a sudden, all these components start falling apart. I think this is that moment of opportunity in Lebanon, but the dots are connecting here. The war in Syria that we're seeing that's unfolding in front of us over the last many days is not about Lebanon, but it's going to have a massive implication for Lebanon.
And would you say that it is an unintended consequence of the war and the ceasefire?
It's hard to call it unintended entirely, because the groups who are fighting against the Assad regime are fighting against the Iranian regime, which is funding which is in Syria to some degree as a pathway to control in Lebanon. So
intended that, look, the missiles didn't drop themselves. So there were intentions to take out Hezbollah, but an unanticipated consequence that by weakening Hezbollah and really denying their ability to project power across the border into Syria and reigniting the civil war, potentially toppling Assad, do you think history will write that as an unintended consequence of the
yes,
of the war?
I think unintended. I don't think they didn't connect those dots. No,
that's what I was saying. In your conversation, say if we do X, we're going to get Y. That wasn't part of the calculation.
No, it was a lot less strategic and a lot more tactical.
So, tactically speaking, right now you had this unique situation that many Lebanese felt was untenable. For those of you who don't know Lebanese politics, I'm sure many of you do. There are probably many Lebanese people here. You had a civil war in the country in the 80s after Israel invaded. The civil war ended with an agreement that divided up power, where the Shia had parliament, the Christians had the presidency, Sunnis had the parliament, or prime minister, excuse me, and that system held more or less, except for the problem that every few years, Hezbollah, being the strongest one, would launch, without consulting other parties, a war against Israel, and we saw the consequences. Now that you've removed Hezbollah, not you personally, but the process you were involved in negotiating, does that radically transform that basis of understanding, that power-sharing agreement, which has governed Lebanon for better and often for worse for the last 20 years or so?
So one, I don't think we've eliminated Hezbollah or taken it out. I think it's a very strong, it may, as I said before, it may not be strong enough to fight Israel or to support Assad, but that doesn't take a lot of strength to be a dominant presence in Lebanon. So you can also be weakened and still strong at the same time when it comes to the Lebanese context. What I believe, though, and it's not for me or for any foreign power to say how Lebanon should govern itself. That's for the Lebanese people to decide. I'm often asked, who do I think should be the president? And I don't think anybody outside Lebanon should decide who the president is, except to say they should have a president and it shouldn't be a 2-year gap. But I think what I'm trying to say is that there's an opportunity here for the Lebanese who complain bitterly at dinner parties for 25, 30 years that Hezbollah has an outsized role to play. If you're Lebanese, this is your moment to stand up and to say, we want to take Lebanon back, and not do it at the dinner parties, but to do it, on the street and in the politics, and in the body politic and in parliament. Select a president. We in the international community owe Lebanon two things, and we have to do it very soon. One is to live up to our commitment on supporting the Lebanese army and security forces so that they are not weaker than other non-state actors, so that they are the strongest and they have the capacity and capability. And I think that the United States is the largest contributor to the Lebanese army for many years, but we have to up our game, and so does everybody else. And that's going to be with training, equipping, et cetera. Second is that we have to support the reconstruction and the economy in Lebanon so that there is a future for everyone, and especially after a devastating war. But that's the job of the international community, and we should live up to it. But it can't be that the international community comes in instead of the Lebanese political system. They have to live up to their system, to their commitment as well, and their responsibility, which is to really reestablish the state as an independent Lebanese state. It's a remarkable country, and you've lived there. The context of the Middle East, what other country in the Middle East has, you talk about the complication of Shia, Sunni, Christian, but the reality is that you have Shia, Sunni, different kinds of Christian, Druze, Jews, all living in one country with protecting their rights in government and parliament and the military. There's no other country in the Middle East, none. So that's something that now the state has to stand up and say, this is our legacy, this is the state that we are, and with Hezbollah weak, this is the moment to do it.
So there is an opportunity to create a beautiful melting pot, and that would obviously be the best scenario. There is also a risk, however, that the country could go back into a civil war. You say this is the opportunity for Lebanese to recreate their country, take back their country, make it something better. But you also say that Hezbollah is strong enough that it can still be a bully inside the borders, which would suggest that it's not going to just go away and allow the Lebanese people to create this new future that you are calling for, and you think that the international community should support Lebanon in. So how do you prevent this new political beginning from falling off a cliff and becoming a civil war? And how high would you say the risk is of that happening?
So one, I would say that what allows me to wake up every morning and go and try to get a ceasefire when everybody on the planet tells me that it's not possible, it's never going to happen, is because I believe that that these things are possible. So are you right that there's the risk that it goes back to civil war? There's always that risk. But I think we have to focus not on the risk and focus on the opportunity. One, because even if you don't achieve your full opportunity, the best way to prevent the worst case scenario is by focusing on the opportunity.
Isn't it a better strategy to focus on the risk? I mean, as
No.
we're at globally politics,
Absolutely not.
in my job anyway, to focus on the risk is usually what you want to focus on.
Okay,
Good
so-
things if they happen, great.
So
But
you and
focus
I-
on the problems first, because they're likely and
So you and I will
negative
will
possibilities.
agree that it's never a bad idea in journalism to focus on the risk and what could go wrong, because you'll end up, you'll probably end up being right, and nobody will blame you if it went well. And
I
you'll
hope
be able
it goes
to say,
well, but hope isn't a policy.
So, well, I think focusing on all the problems and what can go wrong leads you to constantly look at very small tactical issues of trying to prevent something bad from happening, and you never get anything good. So we focus on a ceasefire, and I can't tell you how many in the think tank world, experts watching TV telling me how naive I am because I'm focusing on the opportunity. But that's how you get the ceasefire at the end of the day, is believing that you can get something done. And I think that if you focus just on how do you stop something bad from happening, that you won't get something good to happen. And I think if you do focus on what the opportunity set here is, then I think, and I honestly believe that Lebanon has a great shot here. And it's all going to unfold soon. I think we have to remain engaged. I think we have to learn from our mistakes. 2006 was a massive mistake by the international community for, one, writing a Security Council resolution that everybody under the sun decided to adopt, even though I doubt they ever read it, because there's nobody in the Lebanese system that if they actually read every detail of 1701 would have signed that, and neither would Israel, because it's let's just say it's an aspirational document more than it is a blueprint. So what we tried to do here is to say, let's narrow the ambition in certain areas to manageable, and let's put a mechanism in place that implements it. And then let's look at how do you turn it into solving the other mistake, which was the departure of the international community immediately. And when the international community did not come in for implementation, they also did not come in for helping the economy reconstruction. So who did? When you have a vacuum, Hezbollah, Iran came in with cash. People then say, you know what, that's the only people that care about me because they rebuilt my road, they rebuilt my house.
Do you think the Lebanese army is strong enough? You said that the Hezbollah is supposed to leave their weapons behind in the south and that the Lebanese army is going to move in and pick them up. A, is that happening? And B, does Lebanese army have that capacity? Because they have not in the past.
You're right. They have not had it, and they have not been even authorized. That even if they had the capacity, they weren't authorized by the government to use that capacity. So what is this? What it is and isn't a ceasefire? Ceasefire said the following. On the first day of the ceasefire, all fire must stop. And while Israel remained in their positions in Lebanon, and that the withdrawal of Israeli forces out of Lebanon into Israel would happen in a phased manner as the Lebanese army is able to move in. Partly because everybody agreed on both sides that the Lebanese army did not have the capacity to just mobilize 5,000 troops into the south in order to replace the Israeli military as it goes back into Israel, and because a vacuum would surely be filled in the wrong way. I think that what we're doing now, we have a mechanism that is just starting to work. There is a senior U.S. military general, a two-star general that is on the ground in Lebanon with a small group that is supporting that effort, which did not exist before. There's now a French general that has joined that effort. The United States is going to chair that mechanism. I think we are working both on deconfliction between the two sides and enabling that transition. I think we're going to have some test cases in the days to come. But so far, the first few days were a bit tense, a bit difficult. But now we're starting to see this work. And I think there is a realization, even among Hezbollah, that this time is not 06. They will have to come back out. So I think that we can strengthen, one, it's not strong enough. We have the capacity to build its strength. And I think the delta between the Lebanese army and Hezbollah is smaller today than it was in 06.
We only have 4 minutes left, and I do want to ask a little bit more on Syria, with the understanding that there was just a very long panel on Syria next door. If you missed it, sorry, it was great. The question I ask, if this was an unintended consequence, weakening Hezbollah, now it's restarted that civil war, based on your experience, based on your knowledge of the region and your contacts, where do you think this is going? Is Bashar al-Assad's, are his days numbered?
So this is one of those cases where I totally understand you have to ask me that. I also you understand that I'm probably not going to answer that. But
I can be an optimist too.
Yeah, exactly. Look, I can't speculate. I think that everybody is watching this and the spectacular nature of the collapse of the Syrian army, which, by the way, is not that big of a surprise. It collapsed spectacularly last time in the Civil War too. It's just that last time it had two powers that came to its aid in a very strong way. Iran and Russia. Yeah. Those two powers are significantly, just like Hezbollah, are also significantly weaker than they were back then. And with Russia busy in a different area, not able to put its attention to Syria, and Iran just weaker overall and not able to support. So I think there is, we'll watch, we'll have to see. I think there are outside powers that are both encouraging and discouraging different activities in Syria now. So we have to see how that turns out. So I don't want to play a guessing game.
How will we know if the ceasefire is being successful in Lebanon? Because it's taking place over a time period. A lot of this is based on Hezbollah's goodwill. They have been weakened significantly. They're supposed to pull back and demilitarize the south, how will we know if this is, if it worked, and when do you think we'll know whether we're out of this? What are the steps going forward that we should all be looking for as we watch Lebanon? Because there are daily incidents here. There's still some targeted attacks. How will we know if it's fallen apart or if it's working?
So one, I want to level set. There is no goodwill here at all. This is not about goodwill. Hezbollah is not required to have goodwill. They have to do this.
Well, act in good faith is what I'm saying. They're supposed to honor the deal.
They have to honor the deal. And because the difference here is that if you do not honor this deal, there will be consequences. And President Biden, on the day that he announced the ceasefire in the Rose Garden, specifically said, we've put a mechanism in place to be able to support making sure that this holds. If that doesn't work and the violation is happening and there's a direct threat or an immediate threat, that will be addressed. And I think Hezbollah is testing this a little bit in the early days. But it's not about what I meant when I say it's not goodwill, they should know that neither we nor Israel nor the international community is going to allow for them to repeat 2006 and not comply.
Do you think
they have to do that, or we go back to war, which is not good for anyone?
So it's just the threat of more conflict. If you don't abide, you will be bombed again. So is this a ceasefire deal, or was this a complete capitulation? Was this a surrender?
No, it's not a surrender. It's a ceasefire deal. It's not not since World War II can I think of an example where one side just is fully defeated and it signs a letter of surrender. It's not a peace agreement either. This is not an end of conflict agreement. It's a ceasefire.
Cessation of hostilities.
It is a
or there are
cessation.
more consequences.
But that's what ceasefires are about. If you don't get to have a ceasefire and violate it at the same time, right? So
how do Lebanese people, in the 7 seconds, 6 seconds, 5 seconds that we have left, how will the Lebanese people finally know that they're out of this?
Between now and the next 50 days, the Israelis will be phasing their withdrawal out of Lebanon completely. I think that is a great indicator that the Lebanese army takes positions in the south and replaces the Israeli troops there. The Israeli troops should be out of Lebanon completely. As you see that, and I think that it's designed in such a way where it's not one big event at the end of 60 days, but rather every several days you will see withdrawals of the Israeli troops as the Lebanese army comes in. So there are built into the system ways for both the Lebanese and the Israelis. It's not just for the Lebanese. The Lebanese are moving back to the south far faster than the Israelis are moving back to their homes in the north, because they want to see that this works, it's not going back to conflict. So everybody is watching. There's no trust here on either side, and there won't be. But there are built-in moments and processes that give you the confidence that it's being implemented. And I think so if you want to look at the things to look for for success, is the Lebanese army moving to the south? Are the Israelis living up to their commitment to move out of the south? Is the mechanism, the international mechanism that was established, able to operate? And so far, all signs are that they are. Those are ways to look at success. If those don't happen, then we're probably, then the fragility of the ceasefire may just succumb to the pressure.
And with that, thank you very much. I hope this was interesting and illuminating, and thank you for joining us.